reformed thinking.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking closely at just one Hebrew word from the Old Testament, but it's a word that really packs a punch, meaning-wise, within just a few letters. We're digging into chef, pronounced roughly Yah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. You find it popping up in different places in the Bible, and it carries these really distinct senses. Sometimes it's talking about, physical things, objects we can picture. Other times it's abstract concepts, and it even shows up as a name for people.
Right.
So getting a handle on these different uses, it really helps you appreciate the richness and sometimes the surprising precision that's there in the original Hebrew text.
You've shared a whole stack of notes and different sources, analyses of this word, and, well, our job today is to kind of distill all that for you. We want to pull out the really interesting bits, connect the dots, so you can walk away with a clearer picture of how this word chef actually works in Scripture. What does it tell us when we zoom in like this?
We'll trace its different threads, look at its roots a bit, see how it's used in specific verses, follow some of the clues scholars use, and even glance at related words in other Semitic languages. It's a great window, really, into the layers of meaning you find in the biblical languages.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack rest and see what stands out. So first up, one big category for Hesses seems to be something tangible, a physical thing like a cord or a string, maybe even a sinew, something we can picture. Where do the sources start with this physical meaning?
Okay, so this usage, yeah, it's often marked as a chia in Hebrew dictionaries, the lexicons, and it's mostly tied to Strong's number 3499. Now, that number covers a few meanings, but this specific sense is distinct.
Right.
The basic idea, maybe going back to the root, seems to be about something hanging over or maybe hanging down. So think of something long, flexible, used for, say, binding something up or maybe fastening or something under tension.
And the sources get pretty specific, don't they, about the types of cords or strings it can mean. What's the first one they mention? Maybe the most vivid one.
Well, one of the most striking examples, I think, is how it's used for binding thongs or sinews. And the sources point out a really specific detail here. It can refer to a still wet tendon of a slaughtered animal.
Wow, okay. Wet tendon.
Yeah, and this is actually crucial. These fresh sinews, they have unique properties. The notes mention that when they're wet, they're, pliable, you can work with them. But as they dry, they shrink and contract, becoming incredibly strong and tight, really capable of holding something securely.
Huh.
And that physical property is key to how it's used in a pretty famous Bible story.
That sounds incredibly specific. It must point to a particular context, right? Where do we see this detail, this wet sinew idea, actually used in the Bible?
The main place everyone points to is Judges chapter 16, verses 7 through 9. It's the Samson story, of course.
Ah, Samson.
Yeah, Delilah's trying to figure out the secret to his strength. And in verse 7, Samson first tells her, well, he lies to her. He says he can be bound if she uses 7 fresh, moist sinews that haven't been dried yet.
Okay.
And the Hebrew text there uses the plural form, urim, literally, moist sinews. Then verse 8 says the Philistine lords bring her exactly these moist sinews, and she ties him up with them while the men are hiding nearby. The detail that they're specifically moist, fresh animal sinews, it kind of underlines the deception, right? These were picked precisely because they should have become incredibly strong binders once they dried.
Yeah.
It focuses on the physical strength of the songs themselves as the means of restraint.
But of course, for Samson.
Right. He just snaps them like thread. But the word choice highlights the intended strength of the bond.
Wow. So yeah, not just any old rope, a very particular kind of cord with specific physical properties that are directly relevant to the story, to the test of Samson's strength. That level of detail in just choosing that word, friga, is pretty amazing. What other physical things can it mean? What else do the sources note?
Another really significant physical meaning for Frey is a bowstring.
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, the cord on an archer's bow, essential for shooting arrows. You find this in Psalm 11, verse 2. It describes the wicked, saying, "For look, the wicked bend the bow. They set their arrow on the string." That's alier.
Right.
So there, quite clearly means the taut string pulled back on the bow. It sort of represents tension, readiness for action, often, like in this psalm, hostile action. Job 30, verse 11 is another place mentioned, although there's a little textual complication there we should probably mention.
Okay, the bowstring. Yeah, a really tangible image of tension, power, crucial for archery, obviously common back then. You said Job 30.1 has a textual issue. What do the sources say about that one?
They do. So in Job 30.11, we run into something called a katif kir situation.
Katif kir. Right, remind us what that is.
Sure. So the katif is what is literally written in the traditional Hebrew manuscripts, the Masoretic text. The kir is what the tradition says you should read aloud. It's often like a scribal note suggesting how to pronounce a word, or sometimes pointing to what might be a better reading if the written form seems unusual or maybe incorrect.
Okay, so written versus read.
Exactly. And in Job 30, verse 11, the katif, the written form, is yeru. But the krir, the form to be read, is yeri.
Just a different ending. Yeru versus Yiri.
Right. But that small difference, it potentially changes the meaning in the verse. Job is lamenting, right? He's talking about how his enemies, his tormentors, are afflicting him. So the ketiv literally means his cord. Interpreted idiomatically in this context, some suggest it means something like they lose his bridle or his rein, maybe implying his tormentors are unrestrained, like they've slipped their own leash, or perhaps God has loosed God's restraint against them.
Okay.
But the quer, with the I ending, means my cord or my bridle. If you read it that way, it could mean they lose my bridle, suggesting maybe the removal of Job's own restraint or control because of his suffering, like his suffering is now running wild, uncontrolled. Or perhaps it implies that God has removed the bridle from Job's enemies, allowing them to attack him freely.
So subtle differences and nuance depending on whether it's his cord bridle or my cord bridle being loosed.
Exactly. It just highlights how careful you have to be with the text, looking at these ancient notations. That little difference involves interpretive choices. It's like linguistic detective work, really.
It really is. Fascinating. Okay, what about tent cords? Did the sources mention that?
Yes, that's another possibility. The sources suggest egg-meat tent cord. You know, the ropes used to stake down a tent, keep it secure, or maybe fasten curtains to the stakes. Job chapter 4, verse 21 is the main reference cited for this.
Okay, Job 4.21.
Yeah, the phrase there is ayuabam.
Yeah.
The phrase there is ayuom, ayunisa yuram bam. Now, the King James Version famously translated yaram there as their excellency.
Oh, right. Doth not their excellency, which is in them, go away, something like that.
That's the one. But many modern scholars and translations, looking at the word itself in the context, Eliphaz talking about human frailty, translate as their tent cord, or maybe even metaphorically as their thread of life. The idea being that the cord holding the tent up, representing life or stability, is suddenly torn away, pulled up.
That makes sense in context. But hang on then, didn't you say earlier there was another alternative reading for this verse too? Not just the King James one.
You remembered. Yes, absolutely. Job 4.21 is another place with some scholarly debate. Some commentators and lexicons, they often cite names like Ewald, Delitzsch, Dillmann, propose that instead of reading yum, their tent cord, we should actually read yelam.
Yaman. Okay, what does that mean?
Ya means their tent peg.
Tent peg instead of tent cord. How does that change the picture?
Well, it shifts the specific image, though the result is similar. If their tent cord is torn away, you picture the rope snapping, right? And the tent collapses. It's a clear image of sudden destruction, maybe representing death or the end of a household.
Okay.
If the reading is Dreb, their tent peg is removed, you picture the stakes that hold the tent ropes being pulled right out of the ground.
Yeah. Same result, collapsing tent. Same result, collapsing tent. Same symbolism of death or the fragility of life. But it's a slightly different visual metaphor for how it collapses. Is it the rope breaking or the anchor failing? This debate involves looking at manuscript evidence, which reading seems more likely based on the textual tradition, and also considering the context, which image fits better with Eliphaz's argument about how fleeting human life is. It's a classic example of how these textual variants require really careful interpretive decisions.
Yeah, a really significant difference based on potentially just one consonant changing. It shows, again, the kind of detailed work involved in getting close to the original text. So, okay, summing up this physical category, we've got these specific wet sinews for binding, we've got the taut bowstring for archery, and we've got tent cords or possibly tent pegs representing the stability of life. It's all about tangible kind of linear things, often involving tension, binding, securing, or their failure leading to collapse.
Precisely.
And the sources also mention this meaning connects to words in other related languages, right? Showing it's part of a bigger linguistic family. That's right, yeah. The sources point out that this core, meaning cord, string, sinew, it has clear relatives, cognates, in other Semitic languages. You find related terms in later Hebrew, like in the Mishnah and in Aramaic. Syriac has a word, roko, yatro, which means cord, rope, even the chord of an arc in geometry, still keeping that idea of a line under tension.
Interesting.
Arabic has a shaum, water run, and that specifically means bowstring or maybe a lute string. Again, that tension string connection is really strong. Ethiopic also has a related word meaning sinew, cord, or bowstring, and even a verb that means to stretch a bowstring, or, interestingly, to strain your eyes.
Huh.
So these shared roots across the region, they really reinforce that this basic concept of a cord or string as a physical thing is ancient and widespread in that language family. And just quickly, the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation, when it translates shrey in this physical sense, it often uses the Greek word noah, nevra, which means sinew or cord. And in one place related to archery, it uses phoretra, which usually means quiver, but some think it might stand in for bowstring in that context.
Got it. So the physical reality of a cord, something linear, used for tension or binding, that seems to be the starting point, the foundation for this word. And its presence across the Semitic language family confirms that basic meaning. Okay, let's shift gears now. Moving away from the physical world, from cords and sinews, into more abstract territory. The sources show that Yua also takes on a whole different range of meanings. These seem to be related more to quantity or quality or maybe what's left over. Where does this abstract category kick off in the analysis?
Right, so this is often labeled as I reva in the lexicons, and it's also linked primarily to that same Strong's number, 3499, just like the physical cord meal.
Okay, same number.
Yeah, which suggests that linguistically these meanings are seen as connected. Maybe they branch off from a common root idea. The core concept here seems to shift from that physical object hanging over or hanging down to something more abstract, like what is left over, or an excess, or something beyond the normal.
That conceptual jump from a physical cord to an abstract idea of excess. How do they think that connection works? Linguistically, I mean.
Well, the idea seems to be that if something is hanging over, like the end of a rope that's too long, that part hanging over is the excess, it's the remainder.
Ah, I see, the leftover bit.
Exactly. So from that simple physical picture, the word seems to develop these abstract senses related first to quantity, like how much is left over, and then maybe also to quality, like something that exceeds normal standard.
Okay, that makes sense. That helps bridge those two big categories. So within this abstract realm, what's the most common meaning we find?
A really central meaning is remainder or rest or remnant. It's all about what's left behind after a part is taken away or after something happens. It could be the remaining people in a group, the leftover bit of food, or maybe what survives some kind of destruction or selection process.
Can you give us some examples? Where do the sources show this remainder meaning in action?
Sure. It's used really frequently for the rest of the people, that phrase, he, or him. You see it in places like Judges 7.6.
Gideon again?
Gideon again, yeah.
Yeah.
He's choosing his army, remember?
Yeah.
And Johad refers to that huge group of men who didn't pass the water lapping test. They were the rest of the initial army who got sent home.
Okay.
Or 2 Samuel 10.10. Joab is facing enemies on two fronts, so he splits his forces. He takes the elite troops himself and puts the rest of the people under his brother Abishai's command. They're the remaining soldiers deployed to the other front. And it appears all the time in those summary phrases in Kings and Chronicles. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, or whoever the king is. It's Oyer Ditzra Jolimsha in 1 Kings 11.41. It's basically a standard formula, meaning, look, there's more to the story, the remaining events, but you'll have to look in the official records for those.
Got it. So it consistently means what's left behind in all sorts of situations. Now, does that remainder always imply something negative? Like, is it always the less important part or something damaged?
Not always, no, though it definitely can. The sources note it can imply inferiority, maybe a number or quality, especially if what's left is just scraps or survivors of something bad. Joel 1.4 is a really clear example of that negative sense. It talks about the devastation of locust plagues. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. Each time it says what X left, it uses a form related to tref, like Yeraya Harba, the remainder of the locust. Clearly, what's left after waves of locusts is a bad thing, a diminished, devastated remainder.
Yeah, definitely negative there.
But it's also used positively, especially in the prophets. It's used for the rescued remnant of Israel or Judah, the ones who survive God's judgment and are preserved.
Ah, the remnant theme.
Exactly. The sources even mention other Hebrew words like shurit and palia as synonyms for remnant in this positive sense, like in Isaiah 4.3, where sure and these other terms all point to those who will survive judgment and remain faithful in Zion. They're the preserved core, the hopeful remainder. So whether the remainder is good or bad, it really depends entirely on the context, what's being left over, and why.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. It covers the whole spectrum, from miserable leftovers to a divinely preserved group. It really depends on the narrative. Now, what about the flip side? Not what's left behind, but the idea of having more than enough.
Yes, that flows directly from the idea of excess or something being over and above the standard amount. From there, you get the meaning of abundance, plenty, or affluence. It refers to a surplus, having ample wealth, material goods that are more than just basic necessities.
Okay, abundance. Where do we see that sense in the text?
Psalm 17, verse 14 is cited. The psalmist is talking about worldly people whose portion is in this life, whose belly you fill with your hidden treasure. They are satisfied with children, and they leave their abundance, that's Urim, to their little ones.
Ah, okay, passing down their leftover wealth.
Exactly. Urim there clearly means their accumulated wealth, their surplus treasure that they leave as an inheritance. Job 22.20 is also mentioned as having this sense of abundance or affluence.
And this idea of excess can even function like an adverb sometimes, meaning abundantly or very much, kind of intensifying a description.
That's right. Just like having an excess quantity means you have a lot, the word itself can be used to sort of amplify the degree of something else. Isaiah 56.12 and Daniel 8.9 are given as examples.
Daniel 8.9, the little horn.
That's the one. It describes the little horn growing exceedingly great towards the south, east, and the glorious land. The Hebrew there is hubrei, greatly, literally maybe an excess of greatly. So hubrei modifies to express this immense, extraordinary degree of greatness. It's not just great, it's exceedingly great. And there's also a phrase, elie. This literally means something like upon excess or according to excess. And it functions adverbially to mean abundantly, or enough and more, maybe even bountifully. Psalm 31.23 uses it. The end of the verse says, the Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly alie repays the one who acts in pride. It suggests God's repayment isn't just adequate, it's overflowing, maybe more than they bargained for.
It really is fascinating how the same root word can pivot like that, from meaning a meager remainder to an overflowing abundance. It seems the core idea really is about something going beyond the standard or being in excess, whether that excess is minimal, like leftovers, or maximal, like plenty.
That seems to be the connection, yeah.
Okay, so how does the idea of excellence fit into this abstract category then?
Well, this meaning seems to come from the idea of exceeding a limit or a measure, but in a specifically positive way. Being out of the ordinary, with a sense of superiority or preeminence or advantage. Genesis 49.3 is the classic example. It's Jacob's blessing, or maybe more of a pronouncement on Reuben, his firstborn. He says, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my strength. Preeminent trace here in dignity and preeminent trace here in power.
Ah, so yours is translated preeminent or excellence there.
Exactly. It was referring to the superior status, the heightened dignity, the greater power that should have belonged to Reuben as the firstborn son in that ancient Near Eastern context. He possessed the excess, the preeminence in these qualities simply by birthright, though Jacob goes on to say he forfeited it.
Got it. So excess in a positive, qualitative way can mean excellence or preeminence, but the sources also mentioned a negative application of excess, didn't they?
Absolutely. Just like excellence is a kind of positive excess of quality, you can also have a negative excess, particularly in speech or attitude. Proverbs 17.7 uses a specific phrase, yeyakir. Literally, yeah, a lip of excess or excess of lips. And the sources translate this idiomatically as arrogant speech or boasting, bragging. The verse basically says such speech doesn't befit a fool, let alone a noble person. It highlights prideful talk as a moral failing speech that goes beyond what's humble or true or appropriate. It's an excess of words or maybe tone driven by pride.
Interesting. So this whole abstract category for a so is incredibly flexible. It really covers a lot of ground. Quantity, from meager remainder to overflowing abundance. Quality, from excellence down to the negative excess of arrogance. It seems crystal clear that context is just absolutely everything for figuring out which specific meaning is intended when you bump into so used this way as a common noun.
It really is.
Yeah.
You simply can't tell from the word Dreas itself in isolation. You need the surrounding words, the grammar. Is it functioning as a noun? Is it modifying something else? Is it part of an idiom? You would know if it means scraps from a battle, the wealth of a nation, the potential of a firstborn son, or somebody just talking too much without that context. The context is the absolute key that unlocks this specific sense.
All right, so we've got the physical chords and the abstract concepts, but there's a third major category. Trey also shows up as a proper name, like for actual people in the Bible. What do the sources tell us about this usage?
Right. This usage is usually categorized separately, often as 3 rata, and it gets its own Strong's number, 3,500, distinct from the common noun meanings under 3D499.
Okay, Strong's 3,500 for the name.
Yeah. And it's identified specifically as a masculine proper name used to identify particular individuals in the biblical narrative and genealogies.
Now, does the name itself have a meaning? Maybe one that connects back to the other uses we've talked about?
It does, yeah. The generally accepted meaning for the proper name, Rudia or Jether, as it's usually transliterated, is abundance.
Ah, okay, so a direct link.
A direct conceptual link right back to that abstract sense of plenty, surplus, having more than enough. It seems the name itself embodies that positive idea derived from the words range, naming your child abundance.
Right. So who are some of the people in the Bible who actually have this name, Jether?
Well, there are several. Probably the first one people might think of is Jether, the oldest son of Gideon, the judge.
Gideon again. His story used stressef for the rest of the people, and now his son is named Jether, abundance. That's interesting.
It is an interesting connection within that narrative block in Judges, yeah. He's mentioned in Judges 8, verse 20. After Gideon captures the Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, he tells his son Jether, rise and kill them. But the text says Jether didn't draw his sword because he was afraid, for he was still a boy.
Okay.
There's another fairly prominent Jether. He was the father of Amasa. Amasa was David's nephew, and he briefly became commander of David's army, actually replacing Joab for a time during Absalom's rebellion and its aftermath.
Ah, right.
Amasa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his father, Jether, is mentioned in a few places, like 1 Kings 2, verses 5 and 32, and also in 1 Chronicles 2.17. Now, interestingly, the sources point out that this same guy, Amasa's father, is identified by a slightly different name in Estene Samuel 17.25. There he's called Yithra.
Yithra instead of Yither.
Yep. Yithra, the Israelite, it says there. So this looks like another case of a textual variation, or maybe just slightly different forms of the same name being used for the same historical person.
Another variant.
Right.
It really does seem common with words coming from this root. And this happens again with maybe the most famous person associated with this name, Moses' father-in-law, right?
Absolutely. That's a key example.
Yeah.
The name Ra does appear in Exodus chapter 4, verse 18. It says, Moses went back to Jether-ith, his father-in-law, to ask permission to return to Egypt.
Okay, so it's right there in the text. It is right there in the text in that one verse. However, the sources, and pretty much all scholarly consensus, strongly suggest that this is likely a textual anomaly, maybe a scribal slip, or just a less common variant form, because everywhere else, consistently, across multiple passages, Exodus 3, Exodus 18, Numbers 10, Judges 1, Moses' father-in-law is called Jethro.
Jethro, right. That's the name everyone knows.
Exactly. And Strong's Concordance itself even cross-references hashtag 3500, Yether, with hashtag 3503, Yitro, indicating they're closely related names, both likely stemming from that root meaning abundance. But Jethro is overwhelmingly the standard, widely attested name for Moses' Midianite father-in-law.
Okay. So while Exodus 4.18 might technically say Hucho, the weight of evidence from everywhere else tells us the intended name for that really significant figure is Jethro. Yitro. Good clarification. Are there other, maybe less famous individuals named Jether?
Yes, the name pops up in the genealogies, especially in 1 Chronicles. We find one Jether listed in 1 Chronicles 2, verse 32. He's noted as being from the tribe of Judah in the lineage of Jeremiel.
Okay.
There's another Jether from Judah mentioned a bit later in 1 Chronicles 4, verse 17, in a different Judahite line. So the name was clearly used among various families within the large tribe of Judah.
Any other tribes where the name appears?
Yes, there's a man from the tribe of Asher named Jether, listed in 1 Chronicles 7, verse 38. And guess what?
Let me guess. There's a variant.
You got it. In the very next verse, 1 Chronicles 7.37, listing apparently the same family line, he seems to be identified as Yithron.
Yithron this time.
Yithron. So for this guy from Asher, the names Jether and Yithron seem to be used almost interchangeably, right there in consecutive verses within the same genealogy.
Wow. It really does underline that name variations were just a fact of life in ancient record-keeping and how texts were copied and transmitted. It adds another layer of detail you need to track when you're trying to identify individuals accurately across different parts of Scripture.
It does. So the sources kind of summarize it by saying that the name Jether, or Jethro, or Yithra, or Yithron, all likely stemming from Strong's hashtag 3500, and that root concept of abundance is used for maybe 5 or 6 different Israelites, depending on how you count the variants, plus the one famous Midianite, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law.
Okay.
And just to round it out, there's even a patronymic form that's a name derived from the father or ancestor. It's Yethri, meaning of Jether, or maybe a Jethrite. This appears in 2 Samuel 23.38.
Who was that?
It refers to Ira the Jethrite. He was one of King David's elite warriors, one of the mighty men. So the name Jether also gave rise to family or clan designations.
Okay. So clearly, when you encounter the forms sh in the Hebrew text, the very first thing you have to figure out is this a person's name, Strong's 3500? Or is it a common noun, Strong's 3499? And then, if it is a common noun, which of those multiple meanings, chord, remainder, abundance, excellence, arrogance, actually applies in this specific sentence?
Exactly. That fundamental distinction is step 1. Is it in a list of sons, part of a genealogy? Or is it describing, what Samson was tied up with, or what the locust left behind? The immediate context usually makes that first distinction fairly clear.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the different worlds of Freya. We saw it as a physical cord, a sinew, a bowstring, maybe a tent cord, things used for tension or binding. Then we explored its abstract side, remainder, remnant, abundance, affluence, excellence, even arrogant speech. And finally, we looked at its use as a proper name, Jether or Jethro, meaning abundance. Looking back at all that, what is this multifaceted nature, this really wide semantic range packed into just one Hebrew word? What does it tell us about the language itself, or maybe about reading the biblical text?
Well, I think it really shows how incredibly compact Hebrew can be, and also how heavily it relies on context. The sources consistently emphasize that the specific meaning is almost never found just in the letters kresha by themselves. Its actual sense in any given instance is critically led up, determined by, the grammar around it, and especially by the other words in the sentence and the wider flow of the passage.
Right, like you wouldn't know it meant bowstring unless the word bow or arrow was nearby. You wouldn't know it meant remainder of the people unless it was talking about a group being divided. Words like axe or locust or treasure or dignity or lips, they're what directs you to the specific physical or abstract meaning that's intended.
Precisely. And even the grammatical form itself can give clues. We saw the plural ta used for Samson's multiple sinews. When it refers to a single chord, or when it has suffixes like his chord or their chord, the singular noun idea is usually implied. So this interplay between the word's form and its surrounding context is just fundamental for getting the meaning right.
And we also saw places where even that context doesn't make it perfectly simple, like that Job 4.21 debate, is it tent cord or tent peg, or the Job 30.1 Lavan Katifkir thing about the bridle, his bridle, or my bridle. These aren't just, dusty academic arguments. They really highlight the careful work involved in interpretation, don't they?
They really do. Those examples, they perfectly underscore the dynamic nature, sometimes the challenging nature, of studying the biblical text in the original. It shows that understanding isn't just about looking up a word in a dictionary. It involves wrestling with evidence from different manuscripts, understanding the fine points of grammar and vocabulary, and sometimes weighing different interpretive options. It reminds you that these ancient texts have come down to us through a long history of copying and transmission, and sort of navigating that history is part of understanding the text responsibly.
Yeah.
The fact that serious scholars debate whether Job 4.21 means a cord snapped or a peg was pulled up, it means they're trying incredibly hard to capture the most accurate, the most impactful image that the original writer intended to convey about human frailty. That work matters.
So for someone listening, someone who really wants to understand the Bible well, recognizing a word like su and its wide range of possible meanings, it isn't just about memorizing definitions, is it? It's more about appreciating how the language functions, seeing the potential for different nuances, and understanding that really diligent attention to the context is what ultimately locks down the intended sense in any specific verse.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It really opens your eyes to the density, the potential layers of meaning packed into the original Hebrew. You see how a single core idea, maybe something related to extending beyond or what is left over, can branch out into such different concrete applications. From a literal rope used for binding, that's a physical extension, to a numerical surplus or deficit, that's quantitative excess or remainder, to a qualitative superiority, or even a negative extreme like arrogance, that's qualitative excess, and then even into a personal name signifying prosperity or abundance.
And that name meaning abundance neatly ties the proper noun usage right back to one of those key abstract noun meanings.
Yes, exactly. It connects the categories conceptually. Naming your son Jether or Jethro, it was likely expressing a hope for or maybe acknowledging a reality of abundance and blessing associated with that child or that family. It shows how these abstract concepts were woven right into personal identity in that world.
So we have taken quite a deep dive into Freck. We've seen how this single word, just 3 consonants in Hebrew, can mean everything from a wet sinew used to bind Samson, to a taut bowstring ready for action, to the leftovers from a locust plague, to overflowing wealth passed down generations, to the preeminence a firstborn son was supposed to have, to prideful, arrogant speech, and even serve as the name for several individuals like Jether and Jethro.
It really demonstrates that getting a true grasp of the text often involves peeling back these linguistic layers, paying incredibly close attention to detailed grammatical form, surrounding words, the flow of the argument, and even acknowledging and sometimes having to study the textual variations that exist in the manuscript tradition. It's a good reminder, I think, of the precision and the care that's needed when we handle these ancient languages, especially Scripture.
You provided some fantastic material for us to dig into today. We really hope this exploration of Rect has been helpful for you, maybe a valuable shortcut to understanding a small but pretty significant corner of biblical Hebrew.
Thinking about that range again, from binding cords to abundance, from leftovers to excellence, it does make you wonder, doesn't it, how that concept of excess, or what remains in the physical world, or even in human character like arrogance, how might that parallel or illuminate spiritual truths? Maybe truths about what remains after God's testing the faithful remnant, or perhaps the overflowing excessive nature of God's grace, or even his judgment, that alier, that abundant repayment we saw in the psalm. Lots to think about there.
That's a great thought to end on. Plenty to mull over. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep looking closer at the details.